All right. Hello and good afternoon to everybody who's getting joined in. We went ahead and started the call here just a few seconds early to make sure we gave you an actual opportunity to get into the call. We know there's a little bit of a delay sometimes with Zoom from the time we actually hit start webinar to the time you actually get into the webinar. And we definitely don't want you to miss anything or miss the most important thing that's said, which hopefully we won't say the most important thing this early on, which we will not. So, with that, looks like the attendees are rolling in pretty quick and slowing down. So I know you've all got a lot of folks probably still left to talk to today and a lot of things on your own task list that you've got to get done. So we'll go ahead and get started. And we're going to be obviously talking about oil filter housing kits, as you see on the screen there. But more specifically, we're going to be talking about oil filter housing kits for the 3.6 liter Pentastar motors, the Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, those fun applications. And when we talk about the oil filter housing kits, we need to talk about a few things. And really, the purpose for this call are these few things. The first being, what does the opportunity look like for you? And I think you'll be pretty happy to see what that is. We're also going to briefly talk about what they do, why they fail, and just as importantly, why they actually don't fail. And then we're going to talk about the engineering improvements that have been thrown into these things by TechExpert to make sure that your customers don't have comebacks and don't have failures. We're also going to go over a couple of technical tips. Now, these are going to be good for you if you're in a shop and you're talking to a newer technician that's never worked on one of these, or just a newer technician in general, or someone who just hasn't worked on them. A couple of little tech tips to go along the way. And then we're going to talk about how TechExpert stacks up against the competition. And again, it's one of those areas where I'm pretty sure you're going to be really happy to see that you've got a pretty strong program in your box. And then we're going to wrap up the call talking about some sales support material that will help you further the conversation around these oil filter housing kits. So let's get started here. And again, what does that opportunity look like? Well, one of the reasons we're discussing oil filter housings today, and again, in general, specifically those for the 3.6 liter Pentastars, is because of the overwhelming opportunity that exists. So if we look here, just in the first 2 months of this year, and we're not even done with the first 2 months, we're still into February here, and we've already seen nearly a 59% increase in units sold versus the exact same time last year, the first 2 months of 24. And so the growth is there. The customers are excited about them. We've got, great reviews on these by both DIY and DIFM customers. And one of the primary drivers of this growth and the expanding opportunity is confidence, right? We now have technicians out there that are more confident. They know they're getting the correct unit. That's a big one. And everything they need to get the job done right the first time in the box. And I said that's a big one on the correct unit because here's the deal on what the units look like, right? We see the growth. What's driving it? Well, it's the confidence. So when I say the correct unit, you have to understand there are 6 part numbers that cover these Pentastar 3.6 liter engines from 2011 up to even current 2024 3.6 liter models, right? And there's 6 part numbers for a very specific reason. They may look a little similar, and in some cases, they might even fit like they should, even though they shouldn't. But there are differences in these units depending on the application that they're going in. So things like the oil filter flow rate can be different. There can be different part numbers for the oil temp and pressure sensors. There's even 2 units that don't even have a temp sensor. So when a technician opens the box and sees that not only is it the full kit, everything they need, but the actual correct style they're looking for, that technician has a lot more confidence installing that oil filter housing kit, as opposed to the fear of what can happen when installing what is found all over the internet and everywhere else, one of these universal designs that have been on the market for a few years now. There's not a lot of confidence in those, and for very good reason. It's different materials. They don't have the same dissipating heat factors. There's a lot of reasons why the universal units are not very favored in the market when it comes to these repairs. So again, the growth is coming not only from what we have in the box, the fact that it's a full kit, but the confidence that the technician has in installing what we're putting in that box. So we know what the growth looks like. We know why these technicians are confident in them. Let's talk about what they do. So obviously they filter the oil. They have the oil filter in there, right? But they also cool the oil. Now there are different versions of oil coolers out there. You have some that are front engine mounted that not only have coolant going through them, but they have air passing over. You have some that only air cool. And then you have some like these that only coolant cool. They're only cooled by the engine coolant because of where they're located. These are located in the valley, the valley underneath the upper and lower intake manifolds. So there's no supplemental airflow. So it's really important that we have a good cooling system on the vehicle, right? And that the housing itself matches the heat dissipating characteristics of the OE style design, right? We want to fix the OE flaws, but it still has to match those heat dissipating characteristics. Because again, these contain passages for both oil and coolant, and they're very close together. So we need to make sure not only is it sealed properly, but we can get that coolant through it and dissipate that heat very quickly. We have to keep the oil cool for a multitude of reasons, and that's what this housing does. So when we say we need to keep the oil cool, that's why we need oil coolers. And so what does that look like for the oil? Well, with an oil cooler, we're going to be able to keep the oil between 180 and 220 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is the sweet spot. And you want to know why is that the sweet spot? Well, because of decades and decades of engineers determining and deciding that the engine runs the most efficiently and the most optimally when the engine oil stays within that range. It lubricates at its best, and it does all the other functions that the oil's supposed to do at its best if it stays within 180 and 220 degrees Fahrenheit. It also degrades at the rate that it should at that temperature. And what I mean by that is, if your oil change interval is 3,000, 5,000, 7,500, whatever that number is, as long as we keep the oil within 180 to 220, that oil is going to be able to do its job throughout the life cycle of that oil change. Not much longer after, but it will maintain throughout that life cycle. So that's why we need oil coolers. We need to keep them at that range. And we also need them because it has a major effect on what the oil does. Remember, the oil cools internally. So as it's washing over and passing over that rotating assembly and that valve train and all those, metal components, it's actually drawing heat away from them. So we need to recycle that oil through the oil cooler and cool it down so that it can make another pass and pull more heat away from those moving components. It also acts like a hydraulic fluid. So with oil, you have a certain amount of pressure depending on the viscosity, and that's a huge impact on the VVT system and turbochargers as well. And the way it does all the things that it's supposed to do, the oil has many functions, but the way it does all that it's supposed to do is it has a bunch of additives that do the different tasks that are being asked of it to do. And so we have to be careful because those additives break down faster with higher heat, and that has the most, crucial impact on the motor itself. So let's talk about those additives and why oil coolers are so important for the breakdown of the oil throughout its lifespan. So with the oil additives, there's quite a few. You could have a whole bunch of different ones depending on the brand of the oil, but pretty much all of them have 5 or 6 very common additives. And the first one is antioxidants. And what the antioxidants do is they slow oxidation. And that is the primary cause of oil degradation. The problem with it is when the heat gets too high, when there's excessive heat, it accelerates the consumption of those antioxidants. And once they're depleted, the oil oxidation will occur rapidly. And that's going to, allow for an increase in wear internally. So we combat that with anti-wear additives, the most common being ZDDP or zinc dithiophosphate. And you can think of this one as kind of like a smooth sacrificial barrier between the metal surfaces. And it prevents the friction from metal to metal contact that causes wear. So basically the anti-wear, the zinc dithiophosphate, is going to keep metal to metal from happening. But again, it will degrade if it's not changed like it should be, but also with excessive temperatures for longer periods of time. We know that 180 to 220 is a sweet spot. Really, anything over about 250 will start degrading these anti-wear additives, and now we're opening the door for metal-to-metal contact. And so we also have detergents, which is another common additive, and these are very simple. They're designed to prevent corrosion and sludge buildup. So we've all seen that valve cover come off, and it's just got that thick caked up oil in there. Well, it's because as the engine oil degrades, it becomes thick and sludgy, and it degrades faster with higher heat. And that's going to cause it to where it will not have the optimal flow through all the oil channels, and it can cause engine damage, obviously, as well as leaving excessive carbon deposits. And that's the last thing we want, is excessive carbon deposits left in the motor. So how do we keep those carbon deposits from getting in there? Well, we use dispersants. This is another additive in oil. And these are designed to keep the engine clean by suspending contaminants within the oil. So, we see the oil go in nice and clean. You can see right through it. Then it comes out and you can't even see past it. It's because it's trapped all those contaminants within the oil throughout the life cycle. Then we drain it out. We put fresh oil in. Problem is, again, with heat, they degrade. Those dispersants degrade. And now we're going to lose our ability to trap those contaminants, and we're going to leave them in the engine in the form of deposits. Again, the last thing we want to do. And then we have viscosity modifiers that are additives in the oil. And these are simple. They allow for multi-grade oils. So like a 1030 or a 530 as opposed to an SAE 30 or 40. And this is going to give protection across different climate and temperature ranges, right? The problem with viscosity modifiers is they're polymers that can break down at high temperatures, which can cause the oil to thin out and reduce its performance across those temperature ranges, which we definitely don't want because we need viscosity to be correct for the pressures that we need for multiple other components like VVT within the system. And then we need anti-foaming agents. Now, that one's not on the list here, but I want to throw it in because it's important, because what anti-foaming agents do are exactly what it's called. It keeps the oil from becoming foamy, right? And because if it gets too foamy, it's going to drastically reduce its pressure and ability to do its job properly. And we don't want that with critical systems like VVT. So remember, we have detergents that keep the oil from getting thick and sludgy. We have dispersants that keep the contaminants trapped within the oil so that they don't get, stuck onto other metal components. We have these viscosity modifiers that keep us within the right pressure. And that has a profound impact on VVT because remember, we have to be able to supply the VVT solenoid with oil. We have to be able to drain it. We also have to be able to pass it through the different channels to either advance or retard the timing. Well, if we have thick, sludgy oil, we're not going to get it through those tiny little screens on a VVT solenoid. If we have oil that is too foamy, it's not going to have the pressure that needs to go through there. If the viscosity modifiers have broken down and we have too thin, we're not going to have the right pressure. And if we have contaminants being able to pass through with the oil and not be trapped, then we're going to have those getting caught up in the screens and the solenoids as well. So all of those additives breaking down have a profound impact, not only on lubrication and cleanliness of the engine, but also how critical systems like VVT work. And oddly enough, one of the biggest problems with those 3.6 liter Pentastar motors is, of course, the oil filter housing kit. But alongside it is also one of the top selling solenoids, the VVS 1908, which is going to also be for that same motor. And so you can see the reason we need oil coolers is because we need to keep the oil able to do its job throughout the life cycle of that oil change so that not only does it protect the motor, but critical systems work the way that they're supposed to. So let's talk about how these fail. But again, more importantly, let's start with how they don't fail. They do not warp. Now, the myth is that the housings warp, and that's what causes them to leak, which is understandable because there's multitudes of places this can leak, and it can be on just about any corner of the unit. So the myth came out that, the housing must be warping. That's why there's so many different opportunities for it to leak. Well, that's just not true. As a matter of fact, the housing itself, the high strength heat resistant material that it's used out of, does not warp. It's just got a lot of, unfortunate weak points in the OE design. But thankfully, TechExpert took a look at all these and we actually found a solution for all of them. And so, it can leak from the core plugs, and I'll show you what that looks like. It can leak from the oil pressure sensor. I'll show you what that looks like as well. And then also the lower seals can fail. And I'll throw in another little opportunity that we found to fix that even enhances the, confidence in these units as well. And so again, they can leak from the core plugs. This is at the front of the housing, just below where the oil filter housing seats on the neck. And these are just a byproduct of manufacturing. Those three little core plugs in the back, those are basically channels for the oil and the coolant. And when these are molded, there's a rod that's put in so it keeps those channels clear. When the molding is done, we got 3 holes in the back. So we take the same material, we plug the hole, and we ultrasonically weld it in the back. That's what the OE design called for. Just a plug and then ultrasonically weld it. And the problem with that is we have oil and pressure. If oil is going to find a way around anything, it's going to be 2 pieces of plastic, right? Or 2 pieces of glass. There needs to be a seal somewhere. And on the OE design, there were no seals whatsoever. So what we did with TechExpert is we took the actual core plugs themselves and put a O-ring on the inside. So there's now an O-ring as part of the core plug before the core plug goes in. And so now, not only does the core plug have a seal, but it's ultrasonically welded on the back. And now the oil can't even get to the external part of the housing because there's a real seal that's meant to keep oil contained within on the inside. So that takes care of the front of the housing leaks, which was one of the biggest problems. One of the second biggest problems was from the pressure sensor. Now, it wasn't actually leaking from the oil pressure sensor itself. It was leaking from the brass insert. And so if you look on the right-hand side there, you see those little brass inserts. Well, on the OE design, just like the core plugs, there was no seal whatsoever. Those brass inserts were pressed into the housing, and you see they're knurled there. They have a little bite to them, and that was the whole process. Is you press them into the housing, they bite into it, and you're all good to go. That's what the OE thought. Well, again, we're talking about oil here, and if there's a way to find around something, oil's going to do it. And so again, the fix for this at the front of the housing was we have, obviously use the brass inserts like the OE did, but we're going to seal it from the inside just like we did the core plugs. We're going to actually cut a groove into that insert, and we're going to put a real O-ring on. So again, from the inside of the housing, the oil never has a chance to get to the outside portion of the housing. So again, it's sealed internally, and that takes care of the front and the rear of the housing. Now on the bottom, these were a pretty common area for leaks as well, because they, remember, these are torqued down, so they have pressure, they have heat, and they have a lot of cycling going through them as far as warm oil. And so really the issue here, at least the OE put a seal on the bottom, but they used a very kind of cheap generic seal that was very prone to distortion and being crushed, and that would cause an oil leak. So again, the TechExpert solution, we're going to pre-install these for the customer, which makes them happy, but we're going to pre-install them with distortion-resistant seals, a much better synthetic seal material that's less prone to that distortion and failure. So now we've got the front, the rear, and the bottom of the housing taken care of, where we're not going to have those leaks anymore. But then one of the most critical ones we talked about in the beginning here, when we talked about what the oil cooler does, remember, we have coolant going through this housing as well as oil, and we don't want those two things to mix. Well, unfortunately, on the OE style housing, they did, because this flat black cap on the right-hand side you see was just like the core plugs at the front. This was the passage that was left open during manufacturing. Sorry, my mic cut out for a second there. But this was the opening that was left open from manufacturing. And just like the core plugs, they were pressed in and ultrasonically welded. Well, again, we're talking about heat and pressure here. There was no seal. So what we did, same thing. We put a seal on that cap, and then we pressed it in, and we ultrasonically welded it. So all of these sealing points that were causing leaks, we've addressed with TechExpert. And now we can confidently explain to the customer it was never a warping issue. It was the fact that it could leak from pretty much every corner because it wasn't sealed properly. But now you have confidence because with the TechExpert unit, it is sealed properly. And that's important for these technicians because this is at least a minimum of a 4-hour job, right? You have to remove the upper and lower intake manifolds. You have to remove the injectors and the rails. So there's a lot involved depending on the application. Some of them take a little bit longer than that. So the last thing we want to do is replace this 2 or 3 times. So I told you I'd give you a couple of quick tips here. One being, if you've got a newer technician, and they should know this, most technicians know these things, but if you see someone working on one of these for the first time and they have it all disassembled and those intake ports are not covered with blue tape or, a shop rag or something, maybe just mention it to them like, hey, you might want to cover those intake ports, because once they pull that old housing up to take it out, there's going to be dirt, there's going to be debris, and when those hoses come off, there's going to be some oil and some coolant spill out. We don't want that going into the intake. So that's just one little thing we can kind of stretch out there and say, hey, Don't forget about this. Another one is here on this leg of the housing, if you're going to have a unit get sold and then the vehicle never even leave the shop before a new leak is found, it's going to be because of this leg. So this is the first part of the housing that gets inserted into the valley once the job is complete. It's the lowest portion there. The problem here is we have to guide this in pretty easily, and we don't want to force it. Well, if that O-ring is dry, you're going to kind of have to put a little bit of force on it to get it into its little port. So just like any other seal, we need to lubricate this. So we should have clean engine oil because we're going to be doing an oil change with this, I would hope, right? Let's take a little bit of clean engine oil and rub it around that seal, and then that will guide in no problem at all, right? The problem is if they force it in and they don't have it lubricated, it can cut it, it can crush it, and they're going to have an immediate leak right after the fact, before they even finish the job. So if you've got a newer technician that's never worked on one of these, or somebody that says, hey, I always have a leak at this point, here's a tip for you. Just lubricate that O-ring, and that's going to help you avoid a comeback or, a repair that doesn't get finished. Another quick tech tip, in the valley, underneath these housings, there's a pretty deep kind of area that it sits in that can hold anywhere between like 1 to 2 quarts of oil when that leak happens. So if they have a housing that leaked, an original design or something like that, when they replace it, before they ever put the new unit in, they need to clean that valley out completely. Because if they clean it out for the most part and they put a new one in, and then the customer drives away, if that customer has a hard braking or a hard acceleration event right before they get home, that oil can slosh back over the backside of the motor. And the next day, when they back out of the driveway, they're going to have a new oil stain on it. And they're going to think, oh, great, I didn't get the job done right. Well, it's not that the job wasn't done right, but now the technician is going to have to tear it all back down to verify it and find out that, oh, I really should have just cleaned the valley out a little bit better. So we got to make sure our technicians know, clean that valley out completely before you ever, try to finish the job up and put the new one in. That way we don't have a comeback for no reason. And then one last tip for you, we got to be careful with these oil filter housing caps and the torque in general on this one. Some of this gets torqued in a specific sequence. Some of it gets torqued in inch pounds. Some of it gets torqued in foot pounds. So that's very important to remember. But we also need to remember on the cap itself has an O-ring, just like, the spin-on oil filter. It's got an O-ring, and we need to lubricate that just like that O-ring on that leg I just talked about, because these will get hot and it's harder to take them off, especially if the technician that did the job before, this technician working on it now, cranked down on that cap too much. If it's over tightened, now the next technician that works on these is going to have to usually use a breaker bar to break this loose to get the filter out, and that can put a lot of stress on the housing, and it can cause the neck to crack. A lot of people thought the neck was cracking from heat or that warping issue. Turns out, really, it was just forcing the cap on and then having to force it back off. All we have to do is lubricate that O-ring on the actual cap, and it should just spin right on. It'd be easy to tighten down. This is really 18 foot-pounds is hand tight, really, right? So once it's tight, you leave it. The next technician can take it off without putting stress on the housing. So there's our tips. And then I also want to leave you with this too before I pass it off. There are related sales with these oil filter housing kits. Obviously, if you're doing one, you're going to need engine oil, and we hope anyway. And then you're going to need coolant. Hopefully they're using one of our kits, but if they do decide to go the universal route and use somebody else's, they're going to need an oil filter as well. And then also recommended here, we're already down this far. We've torn a bunch of stuff apart. Might as well look at spark plugs, ignition coils, coolant hoses, things like that. Might like kind of call it a tune-up for lack of better words, even though we don't do tune-ups anymore. But you already got it taken down that far. If it's a high mileage vehicle, there's a couple opportunities there for some add-on sales. So with that, I'm actually going to pass this over to Mr. Stephen Toney from our product team, who's going to talk about a lot of the other great talking points we have around these housings that are going to help keep the discussions going and getting those conversations started at the shop level. So Stephen, the show is yours, sir. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. So as Corey mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a myth around these oil filter housings that what's causing them to fail is this the housing itself is warping, and that's all it is really. It's a myth. It's not the reason for the failure for these oil filter housings. And because of that myth, it's led to some designs of these oil filter housings using aluminum. And those aluminum housings, they can retain heat more than intended. So, the way we kind of look at it is, we think of it as like a frying pan with a metal handle. If you're heating up a frying pan, that heat is going to travel from the pan to the handle, and you're going to need something between your hand and that handle in order to pick up that pan. So, standard or TechExpert here, what we've done is we've created our oil filter housings using a Zytel technology. And what Zytel is it's a trademark of DuPont, and it's a high temp synthetic thermoplastic material that has very good electrical and flammability properties, and it performs well under high temperatures. So then, we also offer our oil filter housings in 6 different designs. You'll find some out there that use a universal housing, but what we've decided to do is offer them under our OFH 100, 101, 103, 104, 111, and 136. And the reason for offering these housings under those 6 numbers is because they use a different filter depending on the specific year of the vehicle. The universal housings, they're going to have to use one specific filter, which can cause confusion. You'll see some warning labels on some of those oil filter caps, reminding the technician to use a specific oil filter may not be designed for that year, make, and model. So by creating 6 different oil filter housing kits here, it uses the specific oil filter, based on the year, make, and model of that vehicle. And then all of our oil filter housing kits are completely assembled. They include the oil pressure sensor, oil temperature sensor, the heat exchanger, the lower mounting gaskets, the oil filter, as well as the cap, the manifold gaskets, and the mounting hardware. Also, what's great about these is not only are we offering all of this together, but it's completely assembled and ready to be installed right out of the box. We've noticed that some of those sensors, when they are replaced from a previous oil filter housing, they're damaged when being removed and being reinstalled. Then also, as Corey mentioned earlier, those oil filter caps, they need to be tightened to the OE specs, and a lot of times they are over tightened, and when they unscrew that cap after it's been over tightened, they end up cracking. So by having everything assembled together and that cap being torqued to the OE specs, it prevents any possibility of that cap actually cracking when undoing it in the future. And then just to, continually make improvements on OE designs, standard oil filter housing kits, they are installed, or all of the installed components do undergo extensive testing, so they can be installed with confidence. Housings are pressure tested for leaks, and oil pressure sensors and oil temperature sensors are tested for accuracy. And then if any new applications are being included with any of the oil filter housing kits, they're tested on a specific vehicle in our testing center in Irving, Texas. And then this just shows that we have the correct and complete coverage for those Pentastar V6 engines. As you can see, our TechExpert product line for these oil filter housing kits has 100% coverage for the Pentastar V6 engine. Our closest competitor, we offer 11% more applications than our nearest competitor. And then here you can just see the key differences in what we offer versus the competitors. As you can see, not everybody includes the gaskets. Those gaskets are crucial when replacing the oil filter housing kit to prevent any future leaks. And then, for those competitors that do offer the sensors, they do offer the gaskets, they do offer the filter, it's not all installed. It's just included in the box. It's not like the TechExpert oil filter housing kit, which is completely assembled and ready to be installed right out of the box. And then lastly, our oil filter housing and oil coolers are a growing line right now, and we recommend everybody to carve out some space on their shelves for these products. And just a real quick showing of our top 4 movers for our oil filter housings as well as the oil coolers, as you can see here. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it off to Aaron Schaefer.
Awesome. Yeah, Stephen, thank you very much. And Corey, I thought that was very, very well done. So I'm going to talk about a couple different support materials that we have available to you. And I guess we'll start with the ugly one first. And that is something that we created to address warranties and more specifically, fraudulent warranties. This flyer was created in the Check the Part template. And Check the Part is a large scale industry initiative that was created by multiple manufacturers and then supported by both of our major aftermarket industry associations, both MEMA as well as Auto Care Association. And the mission of Check the Part is really to help educate and arm parts professionals with the information needed to effectively be able to say, no, we're not going to take that back. That's not a real warranty. It's not our part. It's an OE part in the box. Stop trying to take advantage of us. We know that customer service is important, and people are apt to take back a lot of warranties. But we believe just by opening the box and checking the part, we can identify more fraudulent warranties, and that it is okay to say no sometimes when the part in the box doesn't match that manufacturer. So that's kind of the initiative overall. Now, this piece was created by us to help support folks with the TechExpert oil filter housings, because as we started going through returns in the NAPA DCs, we noticed that an awful lot of the housings that were in the TechExpert box weren't ours. There's certainly some OE stuff, some very 12-year-old parts that came off the vehicle that folks had returned for full credit. And it's so critical on a category like this, because when you're talking about oil filter housing kits, it's a pretty expensive part. It's hundreds of dollars, and one bad return can make a decent day a bad day from a store sales standpoint. We also saw that more and more pieces of low cost, low quality parts where people had purchased some, who knows where it was from, but it wasn't ours. It wasn't OE. It wasn't on the vehicle that long based on how dirty it was, but it failed quickly. And then at some point, it was decided that they want to put on a better product. So they went to the store, they bought a TechExpert part, it solved the problem. They felt like they were entitled to one for free because the cheaper part they bought failed. So they put that back in the TechExpert box, returned it to the store, got a big credit, and went on with their life. So this is just a nice way to identify parts that are actually ours, that, hopefully you don't get these back. But if they do, when you get an oil filter housing back, this is how to quickly identify if it's a TechExpert part. The first 3 digits etched onto the side of the housing will match the last 3 digits of the part number. And then the last 4 digits will be a year. That'll tell you there's other things to this date code. But really, if you know this, then it becomes pretty easy to determine what it looks like. And you can download a version of this from our website at napaechlin.com. Now, we'll talk about some more fun stuff, the pieces that have been created to help you sell more parts. I think Corey and Stephen did a really nice job of going over these and telling you some of the features and benefits and the design improvements that we have over OE. And now we need to make sure you're confident in that and you have the material you need to be able to take this to the street and talk to your service provider customers about it. So, in addition to a wide array of printed materials that are available to you that you can get from your NAPA Echlin salesperson, or you can download them from napaechlin.com. We also have a detailed library on YouTube where we're constantly uploading videos. We have a dedicated playlist for this category and even includes a detailed installation video. On our site, we've also created a very detailed for digital product portfolio. And to find this stuff, once you go to napaechlin.com, go to the top of the page, click on digital resources, and there's a search bar right in there. You can just start typing in oil filter housing. And then below, everything that we have that's mapped to oil filter housings will pop up. You can click on that piece, read it, download it. The digital product portfolio it's pretty detailed, but if you want to go to that next level of technical information, that's a great source. Then, lastly, we can wrap it up. As far as we'll tell you what's in our box. As Corey went over, there's multiple design improvements against leaking, and maybe to some folks, especially to do-it-yourselfers, it's a complete kit that's already put together that includes everything someone would need. And this is becoming more and more popular with technicians because it saves them time and they don't have to worry about inserting sensors into a body, and they know it has the right sensors. They also do, they cool the oil correctly. They keep the oil at the correct operating temperature, as opposed to a design where you're going to cool the oil correctly, and then before you dump it back into the engine, you're going to heat it up again. And that's a design that, OE chose not to use I think, for pretty obvious reasons, especially for where this part is located. It certainly doesn't get any air flowing over it to cool it. So that's why they've chosen to use this type of material. And then coverage. Obviously what we talked about today is primarily the Pentastar numbers, and that's certainly the bulk of the sales in this entire category. But they do fail on other vehicles beyond Chryslers and Jeeps, and we do have industry-leading coverage in this category. And as they become adopted more and more, I think this is a category that will certainly continue to grow. So, with TechExpert oil filter housings, what do you get? Well, really, you get a part that's complete and correct. The coverage across the offering is complete. More importantly, what you get in the box is complete. As you guys know now, it's completely assembled. It's a kit, and it's correct. We've done the correct engineering and the correct cataloging so that when you recommend it, you can know that that part is absolutely year, make, model, vehicle specific correct. Look, we don't want to have 6 part numbers if we really could have 1 or 2. That's a drain and a drag on us for resources and shelf space and all of the obvious issues. But the reason we do it is because it's right. There's just too much variance in the OE units. For whatever reason, this is how Chrysler decided to do it. And to keep the vehicle operating exactly as intended, we knew that we had to offer multiple parts and that selling a universal just wouldn't cut it. So that's what we had today. We'll turn it over and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, hey, you know what, Aaron? I love the way you ended that too. Just to say the last piece there, it's complete and correct, and I think that's the way to open the conversation about these kits. If we're talking to a technician or a shop owner, is hey, it's a complete and correct repair, And that opens the door for a lot of questions like, well, why is it complete? Why is it correct? And now we've got a lot of material where we can go through and say, this is why. And I think that really is a great way to sell the program itself. So with that, Aaron, I don't see any pending questions. So I'll just say again, thank you to you and Stephen for presenting with us today. And thank you to everybody who joined in. Well, again, we know you've got a lot of folks to talk to and a lot of tasks on your list as well. So we're going to let you get back to those things. And hopefully in the next 10 to 15 minutes, you're going to get a call for an oil filter housing, and you'll know exactly which one to promote out there. So thank you again, everybody. And we'll see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your week and happy selling.
Thanks, Corey.